The rain fell red. Sergeant Mara Voss had been told the color was iron particulate, oxidized debris from the bombardment that had stripped the upper atmosphere down to its bones 80 years ago. The science teams back at Threshold called it ferrous precipitation. The people who had grown up in the fringe called it blood rain, and they weren't wrong in any way that mattered. It hit her visor in long diagonal streaks and pooled in the cracked earth around her boots. And she stood there at the base of the wall, 5 meters of reinforced composite and embedded sensor wire, and she looked up at the thing she had spent every waking hour for 3 years planning to climb. "Charges set," said Kale, low and flat beside her. He was good at flat. All the fringeborn were. When you grew up watching the sky weep rust, you learned to keep your voice level. Timer's live. 2 minutes from your mark. Mara looked at the charge stuck to the base of the sensor relay. Small thing, gray. Looked like a piece of chewing gum that someone had pressed against the housing. "Kill the top 2 meters of wire," Kale said. "Maybe 3. After that, we're climbing on faith." Faith, she almost smiled. Haven't heard that word in a while. Didn't say it'd be good faith. She looked at her squad, Kale, Dovin, Priest, and the medic they all called Sketch because she drew faces on her ration packs when she was nervous. Sketch was drawing a face right now. Mara didn't say anything about it. Behind them 20 kilometers of the fringe stretched in every direction. Red rock, collapsed steel frames half buried in orange sand. Ruins of something that had been a city once before the Veth arrived and decided that cities were inefficient. Before they sealed the perimeter. Before they began their long, patient project of, what had the recovered transmission called it? Optimization. That was the word. Optimization. Mark, Mara said. The Veth had arrived 41 years before Mara was born. That was the thing people forgot, or tried to. They forgot the first contact wasn't violence, it was silence. A signal that stopped all human signals. Frequency that sat on every band like a hand pressed flat over a mouth, and then a voice, clear and enormous, that said in every language simultaneously, "We are aware of you. We are evaluating." They evaluated for 9 months. And then they began. The Veth didn't conquer. Conquest implied an interest in the conquered. They contained. They sorted. They identified. Using criteria no human had ever been shown. Using instruments that could read something in a person's biology that no human instrument had ever detected. And they moved populations. The ones they marked, they kept behind the wall. The ones they didn't, they left in the fringe to manage as best they could. No one knew what the mark meant. No one had been told. Mara knew this because her mother had been on the outside of the wall when the sorting happened. Mother had watched the wall go up and watched her own father, Mara's grandfather, appear briefly at the top of it before the Veth's drones had pushed him back. Mother had spent the rest of her life, 20 kilometers, from a wall she could never breach, raising a daughter on stories of what was on the other side. "They call it the reserve," her mother had said near the end when the lung sickness from the iron dust had made her voice into something thin and papery. "The Veth think it's a controlled environment. They think they're studying something. They think your grandfather and everyone like him is data." She had squeezed Mara's hand. "They've never understood what humans do with walls." The charge blew on schedule. It was a small sound, not the cinematic bang that old film culture had trained people to expect, but a flat crack, a mechanical exhalation, and then the sensor relay at the base of the wall went dark. The red light across the wire housing flickered and died. "Go," Mara said, and they went. Kale was up first, because Kale was always up first. He moved with the particular economy of someone who had spent years treating every movement as a potential last one, pressing hand and boot into the composite face of the wall, with a focus that looked almost serene from below. Dovan followed. Priest. Sketch tucked her ration pack away. Mara caught a glimpse of the face she'd drawn, round eyes, concerned mouth, and started up. Mara went last. She climbed with her cheek against the wall's surface and the red rain hitting the back of her neck and the drone alarm beginning somewhere above and to the east. A low oscillating sound that the Veth used for internal alerts. Not the heavy alarm, not yet. 3 meters up she heard the drone before she saw it. A whisper of displacement, a shift in the air pressure against her left ear, and she pressed herself flat against the wall and didn't breathe. The drone passed 2 meters to her left. It was the size of a large dog. Its sensor swept in a 180-degree arc, and she could see the amber light of the sweep passing across the wall, surface below her feet like a slow tide. She counted. 8 seconds. The sweep cycled every 8 seconds. On the 9th, she moved. She crested the wall 6 seconds later with her arms burning and her lungs working hard, and the full view of the reserve opening up below her like something from a different world. Which was exactly what it was. She had expected ruins. 41 years of Veth occupation, the fringe logic said, should have turned anything into something gray and managed. Functional. Stripped of ornament. What she saw instead was alive. Gardens in the old sense. Organized but not sterile. Buildings that had been maintained. Their original architecture preserved under new additions. Lights, warm and yellow, not the cold blue-white of the Veth's own illumination. Children in the streets below, too far away to make out faces, moving with the unself-consciousness of children who had not grown up afraid. Surveillance, Kale said beside her, already scanning. Top of every third building, but they're pointed outward, away from the center. Mara looked, he was right. The Veth's cameras all watched the perimeter, not the interior. The reserve was being watched from outside, not from within. Which meant, they think the threat comes from out there, Devon said. They think the threat is us, Priest said. It is us, Mara said. Let's move. They made the building Kale had mapped from stolen drone footage, a maintenance structure near the northern edge, used for surface-level equipment storage, in 11 minutes. Mara set the door's mechanical lock in 30 seconds with a pick that her grandfather had apparently made from death sensor coupling, and which had passed him through 3 generations of her family as a kind of heirloom joke. A human tool built from alien parts to open alien-maintained doors. She'd never told anyone how much she loved that pick. Inside, they found dust and crates, and the smell of machine oil, and something else, something sweet and faintly chemical, that none of them recognized. Sketch crouched over one of the crates. It was sealed with a Veth lock, but the mechanism had been poorly maintained. Mara could see corrosion on the housing, and it yielded to the pick in under a minute. Inside cylinders, dozens of them, each one the length of a forearm, silver, with a nozzle at one end and a compression trigger at the other. Sketch picked one up and sniffed near the nozzle. Don't, Mara said. It's inert, Sketch said. Pression seal is intact. Whatever's in here is under pressure. She turned it in her hands. I've seen this form factor before. In the recovered materials from Garrison 7, the Veth used something like this in the early days, during the sorting. Silence. During the sorting, Mara said. Yes. Nobody spoke for a moment. What does it do? Priest said. It wasn't a question. His voice had gone very careful, the way voices go when the speaker already knows the answer and is hoping to be wrong. Sketch set the cylinder back down with a deliberateness that seemed almost ceremonial. The Garrison 7 files called it a recalibration agent, she said. The translation isn't exact. The Veth don't have a direct word for memory. The closest they have is something like behavioral archive. And the agent, she stopped. Started again. It dissolves the archive selectively. You can tune it to specific time ranges, specific associative categories. They're going to make them forget, Kale said. They're going to make them forget everything that makes them want to leave, Sketch said. Everything that makes them want to know what's on the other side of the wall. The studies, the history, she paused. The people on the outside, anyone in here who's been thinking too loudly about resistance. Mara stood very still. She thought about her mother, about the papery voice, and the lung sickness, and the hand squeezing hers, and the word data. She thought about her grandfather standing at the top of this wall before a drone pushed him back, and whether he had looked, and whether he had seen his daughter in the crowd below, and whether he had known that it would be the last time. She thought about what her grandfather would have looked like if he hadn't known. If that morning at the top of the wall had been scraped out of him and replaced with nothing. When, she said. The dispersal mechanism is external, aerial. I'd need to see the delivery system, but the cylinders are all charged. They're ready. Sketch looked up. Soon. It has to be soon. Why store a charged weapon? Then we don't have time for the original plan, Mara said. What's the original plan now? Devon asked. It was to document and extract. She looked at the cylinders. It's not that anymore. What she had instead of a plan was a direction and a deadline, and 5 people who were very good at improvising, which was, as she had explained to her commanding officer back at Threshold 3 years ago, in the meeting where she had first proposed this operation, the most essentially human military advantage there was. The Veth were systematic. They were thorough. They were, in their way, brilliant. The cloaking field alone, the one that hid their observation station in the upper atmosphere from every instrument humanity still had operational, represented a level of physics that human scientists could only sketch the outlines of. They planned meticulously, and they executed precisely. And they adapted to known variables with what could only be described as elegance. What they had never learned to account for was humans who didn't have a plan. Humans who were making it up. Mara split the team. Kale and Dovan would find the dispersal system, the aerial mechanism, likely drone-mounted, likely staged somewhere in the reserve with the charging cylinders, and disable it. Sketch would access the reserve's communication infrastructure. Because every occupied territory had communication infrastructure, and the Veth had never once in 41 years considered that the occupied might use it. Priest would do what Priest always did, which was find the highest point available, establish a sight line, and make anyone who tried to stop the others reconsider. Mara would find the broadcast array. She had carried for 3 years the memory of a signal, not a Veth signal, a human one, a fragmented transmission recovered from a Veth information relay by a threshold signals officer who had spent 6 months pulling it apart and another 6 months translating it, and had handed the result to Mara one morning with shaking hands. 7 seconds of audio, a woman's voice, her mother's voice, recorded inside the reserve, smuggled out through a crack in the Veth's communication suppression that had closed within hours of the transmission's dispatch. I want you to know that we remember everything. All of it. They haven't taken it, not yet, and we keep it like a fire, all of us together, and it is enough. It has been enough. But I need you to know that we see the wall, and we think about what's on the other side, and we have not stopped. We will not stop. Tell them. Whoever is out there, whoever you've become, tell them that when you come, and you will come, because that's what we do. We come for each other. And then the signal had ended. Her mother's voice, recorded 12 years before Mara was born, when her mother was still on the outside of the wall, and her grandmother was on the inside. The woman in the recording was her grandmother. Had listened to it so many times she could hear it without playing it. She heard it now, moving through the reserve's back streets while the warm yellow lights came on in the windows above her, and somewhere in the middle distance a child was laughing at something. That particular helpless laugh that children produce when something has struck them as genuinely and completely funny. A sound that had no survival utility whatsoever, and was for that reason the most human sound Mara had ever heard. She found the broadcast array in 19 minutes. It was integrated into what had been. From the architecture, from the faded signage she could have read, a civic communications building, place where announcements had once been made. Where a city talked to itself. The Veth had retrofitted it. Their additions were obvious. Cleaner lines, different materials, the faint harmonic hum of components that ran on principles human engineering still couldn't fully reverse engineer. Underneath all of it, the original infrastructure was still there, still connected. The Veth had not replaced the human system. They had built on top of it, which meant the roots were still alive. Mara's hands knew what to do. She had spent 3 years studying every recovered schematic, every piece of technical documentation, every note her mother had left about the systems she'd seen before the wall went up. Her mother had been an engineer. Her grandmother had been a broadcast technician. Mara thought of this while her hands worked. Something in it that she couldn't quite name. Not destiny. She didn't believe in that. But something structural. Something about the way certain kinds of knowledge pass through families, like a frequency that the next generation is already tuned to receive. She thought of falling strings, draping light, the way her mother had described memory once. Not like a recording, she'd said, but like a construction. like threads that hang in the air, and the mind reaches up and pulls them into shapes. You lose the threads, and you lose the shape, but the threads are still there, if someone reaches for them. The board came live under her hands. She pressed her earpiece. "Sketch, I'm in the secondary relay," Sketch said, voice tight and low. "The Veth communication layer is separate from the human infrastructure. They never bridged them. It's like they didn't think it was possible. It's possible. I'm seeing it. Yes. I can patch it into the original broadcast frequency. Every receiver in the reserve that was built before the wall went up will pick it up. And Mara." A pause. "There are a lot of them. They kept them. The people in here kept all the old receivers." Mara pressed her eyes closed for 1 second. "Open them." "Kale," she said. "Dispersal drones are down," Kale said. "All 7 of them. Jovan is being very thorough." "Priest?" "Still here," Priest said. 2 Veth security units responding to the drone situation. "They're going to figure out what happened in about 4 minutes." "That's enough," Mara said. She pressed transmit. She had not prepared a speech. She was not a speech person. She knew what she wanted to say the way she knew how to climb a wall, not from practice, but from the accumulated weight of everything that had led her here. "My name is Mara Voss," she said. And her voice went out across the reserve on the old frequency, the human frequency, the one the Veth had never bridged. "My grandmother was Elsa Voss. She was a broadcast technician. She lived inside this wall for 60 years. She sent a transmission once when the suppression had a gap. My mother received it. My mother raised me on it." She heard distantly, through the walls of the building, a change in the ambient sound of the reserve. Panic. Something quieter. The sound of a community that has just gone still. "I'm here with 4 other people from the fringe. We came over the wall tonight. We found what the Veth have been preparing. What they plan to do to this place. To all of you. To everything you've kept. And we stopped it. Tonight. But tonight isn't enough." She thought of her grandmother's voice. "Keep it, like a fire. I need you to understand something. This city, everything inside this wall, it is not a reserve. It is not a controlled environment. It is not data. It is your home. It has always been your home. And the people on the other side of this wall have been trying to reach you for 41 years. She paused. "The Veth have been watching you, studying you, trying to understand what you are. I think, by now they know. I think they've known for a while. I think that's why they built the cylinders. Because you are not what they expected. You kept your histories. You kept your receivers. You kept the old frequency alive because some part of you knew that someday someone would use it." Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "This is not their experiment. This is your home. And we are coming for each other. Because that is what we do." She released the transmit. What happened next was not a revolution. It was messier than that, and more human, which is to say, it was simultaneous and overlapping, and involved a great deal of shouting, and also someone bringing food to people they'd never met before. Because the impulse to feed people in a crisis is apparently hardwired into the species, at a level that no occupation has ever successfully suppressed. The Veth's response was measured and precise and completely wrong. They had contingency protocols for an external breach. They had protocols for communication disruption. What they did not have protocols for was a reserve that had simply decided, collectively and without a central organizing authority, that it was no longer a reserve, that the wall was a structure and not a fact, that the people on the other side of it were known, were family, were the other half of a conversation that had been interrupted 41 years ago and was now, stubbornly, resuming. Kale blew the main sensor relay at the base of the wall on the reserve side, the mirror of what they'd done on the outside. With 6 minutes of Priest's Overwatch coverage left, the explosion was larger than the first one. It opened a gap in the sensor net wide enough for a truck and the reserve's people, who had been watching the wall for 41 years and knew exactly how the sensor array was laid out, because there is nothing like a prison for teaching its inhabitants the architecture of their imprisonment, went through the gap with the specific purposefulness of people who have been waiting a very long time. On the other side, the fringe was waiting, not because they'd been told. The broadcast had gone out on the old human frequency, and that frequency reached beyond the wall. Faint, degraded by the iron dust and the atmospheric damage, but reachable by anyone with old equipment, and the willingness to listen on the human band that the Veth had never bothered to jam because they had never imagined anyone still used it. A lot of people in the fringe still used it. A lot of people in the fringe had been listening for 41 years. Mara found her way to the gap in the crowd and stood at the edge of it, watching both sides come together. And she thought, this is the moment where a better person would feel something clean, something whole, a completed circle. What she actually felt was tired and hungry and aware of a deep ache in the arm she'd used to climb the wall, and present in a way she rarely was. A particular animal aliveness that came from surviving things you weren't sure you would survive, and underneath all of it something that she couldn't name precisely, but that felt like the word enough. Not triumph, not victory, enough. KL appeared at her shoulder. He was bleeding from a cut above his ear that he seemed unaware of. Veth are pulling back, he said. Security units retreated to the station perimeter. They're not engaging. They're reassessing, Mara said. How long does that give us? She looked at the gap in the wall, at the people moving through it in both directions, at the ones who were stopping in the middle and grabbing each other, holding on with the specific fierceness of people who had not touched the person they were holding in decades, who had perhaps believed they would never. Long enough, she said. Sketch appeared on her other side, holding 2 ration packs and offering one to Mara, with the expression of someone who is very tired, but also very satisfied with themselves. Receivers are broadcasting on both bands now, Sketch said. Human and Veth. Whenever the observation station picks up, they're going to hear everything happening here. Good, Mara said. I also sent a burst transmission up the relay chain, toward the station, to whoever runs it. Sketch met her eyes, told them their experiment had a finding. Mara waited. I said. Sketch paused, seeming to feel the weight of it. I said, your subjects do not optimize. They do not simplify. They do not stabilize into predictable behavioral patterns. They remember. They transmit. They climb walls. They find the gaps. They come for each other. She looked back at the crowd. I said, if you want to understand what you're dealing with, this is your data. This is what we are. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Did you sign it? I signed it from my grandmother, Sketch said. She was in the reserve. She didn't make it. She died a few years ago, but she always said that if she could say one thing to the Veth, it would be. She stopped. Well, I said it for her. What did she want to say? Sketch almost smiled. She wanted to say, you picked the wrong species to study. The observation station's response came 11 hours later. Not weapons, not drones. A signal, carefully constructed, in perfectly structured human languages, sent to every receiver on both the old human frequency and the Veth band. Mara listened to it in the morning, sitting on the wall with her legs hanging over the reserve side, and the red rain having stopped, and the sky gone a bruised orange. That was, objectively, the color of damage and, subjectively, the most beautiful sky she had ever seen. The signal said, this outcome was not anticipated. We are revising our assessment. She thought about what that meant for a long time. The Veth had been watching for 41 years, had been certain they understood the variables, had been certain that with the right conditions, isolation time, the gradual removal of destabilizing factors, the subjects would settle, become predictable, become, in the Veth word, something that translated roughly as resolved. They had been studying what happened to a community under perfect control. What they had gotten was a grandmother pressing a transmission through a gap in a suppression field so that her daughter, 20 kilometers away, would know she hadn't forgotten. What they had gotten was that transmission, 12 years later, shaping a child who had never met her grandmother into someone who would spend 3 years preparing to climb a wall. What they had gotten was 5 people on the other side of that wall finding the cylinders and making a different choice. And that choice spreading outward, the way choices do when they're the right ones, finding all the people who had been waiting for something to spread to. You picked the wrong species to study. Mara folded the signal's transcript and put it in her breast pocket, next to the audio chip with her grandmother's voice on it. She heard, below and behind her, the sound of the city waking up. Both sides of it now. Particular noise a community makes when it remembers what it's for. Not quiet, not orderly, but alive in the way that Only things which nearly weren't are truly extravagantly alive. She stayed on the wall until the sun, the real sun, filtered through the iron haze, diminished but present, had cleared the horizon. Then she climbed down, on the inside, and went to find her team. There was work to do. There was always work to do. That, she supposed, was also very human.